Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the Odyssey of Isaac Allerton, Rebel Pilgrim. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Vice President of Education and Programming here at American Ancestors New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be your moderator for today's program. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history, and we are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. This program today is brought to you by the Brew Family Learning Center. Our presenter today is David A. Furlow, a Texas historian and attorney. David founded the Journal of the Texas Supreme Court Historical Society in 2011. He served as its executive editor until 2020 and now serves as its emeritus editor and historical conference planner. David participated as an on-screen expert in History Channel documentaries in 2006 and 2016. He has presented programs and published articles and book chapters about New Netherland, New Sweden, New England, and Chesapeake archaeology and history for the past 2 decades. The Colonial Society of Massachusetts elected David as a member in 2022, and Lisa Pennington and David Furlow married in 1982 while at the University of Texas Law School in Austin. They have 3 children, 4 grandchildren so far, and David and Lisa are now writing a biography of Plymouth Colony First Assistant Governor Isaac Allerton and the Allerton family. Now, this program will chart the odyssey of an almost forgotten founding father, Isaac Allerton, the first assistant governor of Plymouth Colony during its first decade. Allerton rebelled against the arbitrary authority of church and state in England and America, and we'll hear much of that over the next 45 minutes or so. And so historian and Allerton expert David Furlow will talk about many of the rebellions within this pilgrim's lifetime. David will present, as I mentioned, for about 45 minutes and then answer as many questions as he can in the remaining 10 to 15 minutes of the hour. At any point during the presentation, go ahead and type your query into that Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. This presentation is being recorded, and starting later today, you'll be able to watch a recording of it on our website as well as our YouTube channel. All right, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming David Furlow.
There was a problem with him, wasn't there? The first time my wife, Lisa Pennington, and I came to Plymouth, Massachusetts, we visited a jewelry shop across the street from the John Carver Inn, a hotel named after Plymouth's first governor. Lisa pointed towards a small wampum necklace. I like this one. The woman behind the counter noticed Lisa's Texas accent. You're not from around here, are you? No, we're from Texas, Lisa said. Ah, the shop owner answered. You're here to see Plymouth Rock. Are you a Pilgrim descendant? Yes, I am. How many? Just one. Which one? Isaac Allerton. Ah, the woman pursed her lips. There was a problem with him, wasn't there? Lisa put the necklace down. No, he was great. Meet Plymouth Colony's most controversial pilgrim, Isaac Allerton, the rebel pilgrim. Since the 1620s, people interested in the origins of American history and Atlantic history have had to confront contending visions of Isaac Allerton's life on monuments and in maps, journals, court records aplenty, and books. Isaac's name survives since at least 1634 in the name of Allerton Point on the southern shore of Massachusetts Bay, the Allerton Point Coast Guard Station in the village of Allerton next to Nantasket, where he and Roger Williams disembarked in 1631, and at 72 Allerton Street, where the names of his family appear on the National Forefathers Monument on a street that's borne his name since at least 1846. Robert Charles Anderson, director of NEHGS's Great Migration Project, described Isaac accurately as, quote, one of the busiest and most complicated men in early New England in the Mayflower migration. He called for someone to write a full-scale biography of him. My wife, Lisa Pennington, and I are answering that call. This is not the story of the Isaac Allerton you may think you know, but the one you ought to meet. Born in or around the village of East Berkholt, Suffolk, in the Puritan heart of East Anglia, Isaac Allerton was a complex, creative, and controversial man, a man who made things happen. He played major roles in 8 important communities: Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, Maine, French Acadia, Virginia, New Netherland or New Nederland, New Sweden, Neospheria, and New Haven. His commerce extended as far north as Newfoundland, across the Atlantic to the Netherlands and to England and to Portugal, and as far south as Curacao and Barbados. A Mayflower pilgrim and a master of his own vessels, Isaac Allerton shaped and reshaped early America, tailoring his commerce and credit to fit the needs of ordinary people. Okay. Why do we bother conducting Pilgrim-related research? Haven't we found enough of it? Don't we know everything already? Edward Arbor, in Story of the Pilgrim Fathers, back in 1897, said that not a single ear of wheat is to be hoped for in any further searches of the records because we already knew everything. And this comes from a source citation quoted by Jeremy Dupertuis Bangs, the foremost scholar of the Pilgrims in Leiden, a friend of mine, in his book Strangers and Pilgrims. But he convinced me that that was not the case and that we should continue the search for new records. NEHGS helped make that possible. This is a copy of the article by Caleb Johnson, Sue Allen, and Simon Neal, The Origin and Parentage of Mayflower Passenger Isaac Allerton in East Berkholt, Suffolk, that marshaled new evidence found in manorial rolls, probate records, and other documents, and presented it for the first time in 2019, reshaping the life of Isaac Allerton by showing new records of where he was born, the identity of his parents, and strong clues that, in fact, he may be the 3rd generation of rebel, because as we'll see to follow, you know, he was born of rebel stock. That birth may, in fact, go back to 3 generations of rebel stock, because it appears, as Sue Allen, Caleb Johnson, and Simon Neal, you know, stated in their record, in their NEHGS register record, and at Pilgrim Hall in September of 2019, it is quite possible that Bartholomew Allerton, Isaac's father, was either the son or nephew of Mary and Martyr Rafe Allerton of Great Bentley, Essex, just across the River Stour, or Stour, if you're of Essex pronunciation, in East Anglia. According to John Fox's Book of Martyrs, best-selling book after the Bible for some 80 years in England, Queen Mary's churchmen arrested Ralph Allerton, tailor and merchant of Great Bentley, Essex. That's a few miles from Colchester, Essex, after he traveled to a place called Barfold to buy bread for his wife and children, then spoke with fellow believers, that is, fellow evangelicals there. Barfold was one of several alternative Tudor ways of spelling Berkhold, that is, East Berkhold, where Isaac Allerton and his sister Sarah Allerton were born to Bartholomew and Mary Allerton in the 1580s. So there's a connection there. There's also a connection, it would seem, in that tailoring was a profession often passed down from father to son, and Isaac's father, Bartholomew, was a tailor. It is therefore possible that tailoring began with Rafe Allerton, passed down to Bartholomew, and then passed down to Isaac, giving him the basis for weaving together the fabric of early American society. The name Allerton and its variant, Alderton, is also a very rare surname. There are very few of them, and so just the surname itself indicates a connection. The close proximity of Colchester and Great Bentley to East Berkholt is another such connection. Most important of those connections was we know that Rafe Allerton crossed the River Stour from Essex into Suffolk and met with fellow believers in Barfold, that is East Berkholt. Now, Bishop Edmund Bloody Bonner imprisoned Rafe in the Lollards Tower because he was preaching without a license and knew biblical verses and shared them with fellow parishioners as part of an evangelical underground in 1556 and 1557. Bonner tried Rafe Allerton in London at the Lollards Tower and then at Fulham Palace for heresy, convicted him, and the incredible trial transcripts still exist in great detail, and then burned Rafe Allerton to death along with 3 others in Islington on September 17, 1557, as this woodcut from Fox's second edition reflects the martyrdom of Ralph Allerton, James Austu, Margaret Austu, and Richard Roth at Islington. Now, we know that Bartholomew lived in East Berkholt, and here it's depicted. It's at the heart of Constable country. So this is an area of especially beautiful landscape, celebrated as the place where John Constable painted his most famous paintings, being born some 191 years after Isaac Allerton in the same village. And it's a beautiful village where Lisa and I and Lee Filson have presented a program in the church that Isaac grew up in, and the school, the Lamb School, that he began attending in 1594 to learn Latin, which he used throughout his life. Now let's take a look at the ancestry we know of and the ancestry we suspect. East Berkholt's parish registers don't survive before 1653. So we have no birth records, no marriage records, no death records of his parents. We may also not have them because the records that were supposed to be kept were records that were often not compiled when separatist families chose not to be baptized in ceremonies that they deemed to be popish under the Anglican Church. We know that Bartholomew Allerton, a tailor, married Mary, last name unknown, by the early 1580s at an unknown place, and that they were living there in East Berkholt by the 1580s, by the mid-1580s. Bartholomew and Mary were traditional Catholic or Anglican names, suggesting that they began as Anglicans and then radicalized over time. No birth, baptismal, or marriage records survive about either Bartholomew or Mary or Ralph Allerton, who could have been Isaac's father or uncle, Bartholomew's father or uncle, and none about Isaac or Sarah either. So this has presented great challenges, and I salute Caleb Johnson, Sue Allen, and Simon Neal for tracking it back through all of these archival and archdiocese records and disclosing something not known to us until their article came out in 2019. We have 2 principal sources of records there for Bartholomew's years in East Berkholt. One is the Old Hall Manor, the archival records, and you see there in the insert Bartholomew's name spelled Allerton, in that great variability of surname signing and recordation that occurred in the late 16th and 17th century. We also have him in the commandery records, which go back to the Knights Templar in the commandery manor, also in East Berkholt. We have him, Bartholomew, making 3 pence franc pledge payments during Old Hall leet courts, not because he was a defendant, but because that was the assessment every year, sort of like a homeowner association assessment of those who live there to help support activities. Based on the best recollection, best reconstruction of events, Bartholomew Allerton repeatedly attended these court proceedings during the 4 years from 1583 through a 1587 in Old Hall Manor, then attended Bunchmore over in Commandery Manor in the late 1580s during the time that Spain was launching the Spanish Armada against Elizabethan England. Sarah Allerton was probably born ahead of Isaac based on the history of her marriages, sometime around 1584, and the best evidence suggests that Isaac was born in 1586, and that is an important year. Because that was the time during which an experiment in proto-Calvinist Presbyterian government occurred in the Dedham Valley, called the Dedham Classis, or the Dedham Vale was what it was. I've walked the distance from Isaac Allerton's first church, St. Mary the Virgin Church in East Berkholt, down across the country lanes over the River Stour into Dedham. And both places, both St. Mary the Virgin Church in East Berkholt and Dedham Church, were at the very heart of the two churches most frequently visited by these reform-minded, Cambridge-educated ministers and elders who were running an underground proto-Calvinist church, hinting at what separatism would become throughout the period from 1582 to 1589. The eruption of the Marprelate controversies, where someone was mocking bishops of the church, led to underground investigations of these underground Presbyterian churches and threats against their members that led to the dissolution of the Dedham Presbyterian classes in 1589, the year after Armada. These were also an important period of time for something that has not been frequently discussed in Pilgrim and Puritan history, with the exception of Frank Bremer, who discussed some of these things in connection with his excellent biography of John Winthrop. Beginning in the year 1586, some of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in the past 1,000 years plunged the world into the coldest decade of the Little Ice Age. That began with the eruption of Mount Kelud in 1586 that killed 10,000 people. Temperatures dropped by 2 degrees Celsius, or about 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like much, but in an age when subsistence farming was the norm, it plunged England into the last period of a dearth, that is, a real hunger. The Waveney River, just up in Suffolk, froze solid. There was a fire there, and the poet Deloney preserved the record of the people going over there to get buckets into the river and finding it frozen solid, so these houses burned down there. The following 1590 saw more volcanic eruptions in East Asia and in South America, culminating in 1600 in the most powerful volcanic eruption in Peru that has occurred in South America during the past 1,000 years. These were the years when the weather grew very cold and there were droughts that dried up part of the Thames. Plague followed the hunger, and the last great period of plague prior to 1666 killed tens of thousands of people throughout England and thousands in London. The purchasing power of the average man dropped to its lowest level ever in England between 1596 and 1599. These were the most dismal years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. There were riots by apprentices in London. And as a result of all of these things, many people came to believe that the end of the world was at hand, that end times were present, that the Antichrist was on the march. And amongst Puritans, the Antichrist was the Pope. And they feared counter-Reformation armies that would invade England, as Philip of Spain kept trying to do. And so people came to be very, very radical and to believe that they needed to get their souls right and their church right. And thus, it was in 1594 that Isaac's parents became the first Mayflower family to separate from the Church of England. Here we have a depiction of these times. This is the famous Armada portrait of Queen Elizabeth. English ships enjoy, quiet seas on the left-hand side. But if you look at the right-hand side, God's Protestant wind has worked up hurricanes in the North Sea, destroying the Spanish Armada as it came through the Straits, left Calais, went up the east coast of England, rounded Scotland, and then passed by Ireland, destroying one half of the ships in the Spanish Armada and reducing so many Spanish soldiers to disease, dysentery, and death that only half of those who left returned to Spain in 1589. Religious wars also occurred throughout that time in Ireland and in England and in France of incredible viciousness and great losses of life. And during these times, that's when Isaac and Sarah's parents, Bartholomew and Mary Allerton, separated, stopped attending St. Mary the Virgin Church, an Anglican church there in East Furloq, in 1594. This archdeaconry record lists these separatists, and you can see in the first line it says sectary recusants. These are the people who didn't work and play well with the Anglican Church. These were the dissenters, and one of these families is that of Miss Barker Winslow, who later married Edward Winslow over in Leiden, as part of John Robinson's congregation. These sectary recusants are the people who became the early separatists and the people who left the Anglican Church behind. Here we can see with yellow highlighting, that actually gives you the names of some of these people, who were actually there. Below it, Mary and Bartholomew Allerton. We'll see a better picture in a minute. So here's these archdeaconry of Suffolk records reflecting Anglican surveillance of Mary Allerton, widow, after Bartholomew Allerton's death, circa 15, at the very end of the 1500s, 1600s on an unknown date. But they're keeping track of her because she's one of these people who is engaging in, as they saw it, sedition against the state by not attending Queen Elizabeth's church services and heresy against the Anglican Church. And so that applied to Isaac's and Sarah's mother, Mary, after the death of his father, Bartholomew. But you should recognize that here, in terms of rebellion, it's in his blood and it's in Isaac's stock because his mother and father separated from the church. In doing so, they violated Queen Elizabeth's Act of Uniformity and the Book of Common Prayer and the Act Against Puritans of 1593 that applied to anyone over the age of 16 who, quote, obstinately refuses to repair to some church, chapel, or usual place of common prayer to hear divine service, unquote, for any month's time. The law banned printing, writing, or express words or speeches, unquote, and, quote, any unlawful assemblies, conventicles, or meetings under color or pretense of any exercise of religion, contrary to Her Majesty's said laws and statutes. And by withdrawing from the church, they faced heavy fines, banishment, and even potentially the loss of their parental rights. In 1593, Queen Elizabeth's churchmen and ministers executed 3 separatist ministers, Barrow, Greenwood, and Penry, for organizing conventicles of Christian believers who organized their own congregations with a reverend, an elder, and deacons to try to reconstruct what religious life was like in the New Testament churches memorialized in the Apostle Paul's letters to the Corinthians and the Ephesians, etc. So at this point in time, to actually not participate in state-mandated activities of a state-mandated church exposed one to prosecution for both heresy and blasphemy. That was the world in which Isaac Allerton grew up. That was the path he followed when he and his sister went to Leiden and to join Pastor John Robinson's congregation. We know that in 1608, English separatists, mainly famous for the Scrooby Pilgrims, William Brewster, William Bradford, John Robinson, and others arrived in Holland, and they formed John Robinson's congregation. In 1609, Leiden's leaders, civic leaders, permitted the Pilgrims to settle. We know from records, marriage records and otherwise, that Isaac and Sarah Allerton both came to Leiden by 1611, and that's where they married. And here at the bottom, we've got a treasure of Pilgrim Hall, where I serve as a trustee. That's the Allerton Cup with Elizabethan roses on it, and the year 1608, which marks something important, and I believe it was the year that Isaac Allerton left to become an apprentice in London, where he served as an apprentice for the worshipful order of blacksmiths for a year or so before he made his way down and across the English Channel to Leiden and Holland. And by leaving England, violated English laws. So there, both Isaac and his sister were rebels against the state and church. They also violated norms of the Anglican Church by marrying in a civic ceremony here at the Leiden Stadthuis, or City House, as reflected here to the left. And on February 7th, 1614, Isaac became a merchant tailor, took the Leiden oath of citizenship, thereby becoming an Anglo-Dutch dual citizen of the Netherlands and subject of England, something that would be significant for his future. 1620, Isaac and other members of the congregation crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower and arrived at Cape Cod on November 11th, 1620. Which is why Isaac Allerton, bringing along with him Mary, his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and 3 children, Bartholomew, Remember, and Mary, and servant boy John Hook. That's why Isaac signs the Mayflower Compact as the 5th signer, and William Bradford's list of Mayflower passages. In doing so, he was doing something extraordinary in the eyes of English society. Because the Mayflower Pilgrims, all of them, landed at a place beyond their patent, but whether for that reason or because John Robinson may have put this document together at the beginning, they entered into the Mayflower Compact and thereby blazed a new trail with respect to self-government, because it was the first democratic election of a governor, not by the members of a company or by a king in England, but by the governed in North America, in which John Carver, elected by all freedmen and 3 servants, was the first freely elected governor in North America. American democracy and elections and election politics all began in Plymouth in 1620. After the death of John Carver, and at the same time that William Bradford was elected governor, Isaac Allerton was elected first assistant governor. We would call that today vice president of the Mayflower colony, and served in that capacity from 1621 to 1631, and then in a tumultuous year was reelected to the Board of Assistants at the same time that William Bradford was not elected as governor, but Winslow in his place. So that was in 1633 and 34. I would submit to you that as democracy and democratic elections began in Plymouth, so too did polarization between those who were in and those who were out of power. Isaac did something extraordinary when Miles Standish was unable to work up an agreement with the colony's London creditors in 1625. Isaac was sent there by the colony in 1626 to keep the London merchants or adventurers from foreclosing on and shutting down the colony or taking it over. In his November 16th, 1626 agreement, the London merchants sold their interest to Plymouth's 8 undertakers, those not because they were involved in the funeral industry, but because they undertook responsibility for repaying the remaining creditors the full amount of the indebtedness, and received a joint monopoly on the fur trade. So this is, the first LBO, the first leveraged buyout, the first sophisticated financial transaction in North American history begins with Isaac Allerton as agent for the colony in London, stopping a potential creditor's foreclosure of Plymouth colony. Until Allerton's agreement, all land was property of an English joint stock company owned by merchants and settlers. In 1626, the Plymouth settlers gained autonomy. They took control of their colony's future, and that's significant for all of America. And here's, we actually have the old planters, that is the 8 undertakers, and you see them in hierarchical 17th century order: William Bradford, Isaac Allerton, Miles Standish, John Alden, William Brewster, John Howland, Thomas Prince, and Edward Winslow on the left-hand side, and the 4 principal London merchants, the surviving creditors, Richard Andrews, John Beauchamp, Timothy Hatherley, and John Shirley, all of whom would eventually end up in years of litigation over Plymouth's indebtedness and accounting and responsibility for various ventures and for money made and money lost. It's known from contemporary records in 1630 that Isaac Allerton knew all about Hudson's River and was already aware of the Dutch settlement there, probably because he had sailed to it and initiated relations that led, amongst other things, to a Dutch merchant, de Rosier, coming to Plymouth colony while he was abroad representing Plymouth's interest. I can also say at the same period of time, Isaac Allerton negotiated what has come to be known as the Bradford patent, because Bradford was in charge of the 8 undertakers, but it was the one that expanded Plymouth colony to include the fur-rich Kennebec River of Maine. And that's the basis for the reasons that Massachusetts Bay exerted authority over coastal and riverine Maine up until the 19th century. However, there were 2 different visions, and Isaac Allerton has appeared as the person most frequently criticized in William Bradford's Of Plymouth Plantation. Bradford began writing in 1630 after serious disagreements had already arisen between his vision of Plymouth's future as a communitarian, religiously focused settlement, and Isaac Allerton's view, also as a religious settlement, but one that was much more enterprising, more tolerant of people of different faiths and backgrounds, and more focused on making money. Essentially, Isaac was interested in a commercial commonwealth and joint venturing with Massachusetts Bay merchants and others to more quickly pay off the debt, even to the extent of hiring Thomas Morton of Marymount as his secretary, because Morton had shown an amazing ability to corner the entire fur market. Bradford objected and insisted that Morton be booted out of the colony, and that was a point of conflict between them. Had Allerton been successful in keeping Morton, I would submit the result would have been that Plymouth colony might well have paid off its entire indebtedness in the very early 1630s, rather than moving forward with an indebtedness that plagued the colony until a final civil settlement and comprehensive release of all involved that occurred only in 1646. People have said that Plymouth colony banished Isaac Allerton from Plymouth. That's a falsehood. It reflects reliance on Wikipedia-level knowledge of history and is refuted by the primary source records. Isaac owned land and paid taxes, the highest taxes in the colony in 1636. He retained his Allerton farm on the Jones River until selling it in 1646 in a comprehensive settlement of colonial and personal debt, the same one into which William Bradford and Edward Winslow entered, in which they released all of each other from all claims, civil claims for indebtedness. Isaac was never, as some have suggested, accused of thieving from Plymouth Colony. He was never criminally prosecuted for theft or anything else. There were civil disputes of the kind we see in civil courtrooms today about indebtedness and accounting, but there was never a criminal prosecution of Isaac Allerton. By September 1638, Isaac is living and trading in New Amsterdam, which we now know as New York City. He was there plying the fur and Chesapeake tobacco trade with Dutch West India Company merchants as an agent, including various Plymouth Pilgrims. He bought and sold goods, extended credit, and sometimes sued to collect past due loans in civil court actions that might have been litigation, but avoided a resort to force or arms. This is a depiction of New Netherland, and you can see, how it extends up the Hudson River and also down the Delaware River, and it was the great private commercial colony west of Plymouth. Let's talk about some of the things that Isaac did there. Many Plymothians trusted him and hired him to handle their business in New Netherland. John Jenny, Thomas Willett, and others. Here's an example from a record in December of 1639 at the end of the year. George Holmes acknowledges that he is truly indebted to Mr. John Jenny of New Plymouth. Jenny Mill, the guy who was running the grist. You can still go to the Jenny Mill at the top of Town Brook. In the sum of 60 careless guilders, so soon as Master Allerton, named because he was a shipmaster. He owned multiple ships, not because he was ever a master of people enslaved. There's no record that he ever bought or sold or enslaved any single person. But because Master Allerton shall, with God's help, have arrived here in New Amsterdam in 5 or 6 weeks. And then the account was later discharged before the Secretary of New Amsterdam. So essentially, by 1638, Isaac Allerton had taken those vagabond shoes, to quote the New York, New York song, and was frequently walking the streets of New York's predecessor, New Amsterdam. Amongst other people into whom he entered into contracts and sold goods was Anthony Jansen from Salé. Isaac had to sue Anthony, but they resolved their differences civilly in a district court, a Dutch district court. Anthony is a very interesting guy. He appears to be the first Muslim freeholder in New Netherland or on the east coast of America. His father was a Dutch sailor who was taken captive, brought to Salé in Morocco, converted to Islam, married a Moroccan woman, and they had, as a child, Anthony Jansen. And, if you're born to a sailor who has become a pirate who kidnapped whole groups of people in Ireland and brought them down to Morocco for sale, that's an interesting type of person. And it reflects that Isaac Allerton transcended the greatest prejudice of the 17th century, that between Christians and Muslims, to enter into business transactions with someone who was considered and described at the time as, quote, a horned devil and a pestilence to everyone, Anthony the Turk of Salé. And here we actually see the records reflecting there at the bottom, Manatus, another early version of Manhattan, and Bose van Anthony de Turk, or Turk. That's why he's called the Turk of Salé. And his settlement is recorded on this early Dutch map in the Library of Congress. Now, here we've got the image of a Turkish diplomat in Queen Elizabeth's court, which reflects how foreign Muslims seem to be in the eyes of Elizabethans and those who followed. And the fact is that Anthony does seem to be the first person from a Muslim background who ended up settling and owning land in the territory of the United States. He was the first proprietor of Coney Island in New Amsterdam. He bought lots of land. He had lots of legal problems, and he's the ancestor of the Vanderbilt and Whitney families. So, here's something that struck me as extraordinary, and it reflects that commerce can transcend the prejudices and bigotries of religion, race, and different backgrounds, both in the 17th century and even through today. Isaac did grow up as a Calvinist Christian, and throughout his life took steps to help fellow Christians. He brought a Christian minister to Plymouth in the 1620s, but that did not satisfy William Bradford, who described the man as crazed in the brain. But at least he tried, and Isaac did bring Reverend Avery to Marblehead. Reverend Avery's ship got caught in a storm, and he lost his family on the way there, but he became the first minister there in Marblehead. And then when 3 Calvinist reform-minded ministers from Virginia came up to Massachusetts, their ship shipwrecked off the Hellgate in New Netherland, and John Winthrop was happy to record that when the Dutch Director General of New Netherland Colony was giving slender entertainment, that was not doing anything to help these people, Mr. Allerton of New Haven, being there, took great care for them and procured them a very good pinnace and all things necessary. So they arrived in Virginia. And contrary to the views that Isaac was some sort of, cynical merchant who didn't believe in anything, his Christian faith showed through and is apparent in numerous records when his brother-in-law died, heavily indebted to him, but also indebted to others in Plymouth Colony. Godbertson, Isaac Allerton said, "I shall take last, and everyone else who is owed money by Godbert shall take before me." Something a lot of people do not consider when they consider the life of Isaac Allerton. Isaac Allerton was also a witness to historic events, and he was a witness to terrible proceedings in New Netherland that began when Willem Kieft, the Director General of the New Netherland Colony, initiated a genocidal war against the Lani Lenape Indians in 1641, and then escalated it tragically in 1643. A Dutch seaman, David de Vries, who was frequently in New Netherland, quoted Willem Kieft, Director General, on February 25th of 1643 as saying he would maintain the reputation of the nation and display his Roman virtue by sending out death squads of West India companies to kill these poor Indian refugees who had come down the Hudson River and were taking shelter on both sides of Manhattan Island. And de Vries warned, if you go ahead with this, you will murder your own nation, for your own settlers will have no warning of the start of a terrible war. And this is a contemporary, depiction of Willem Kieft's soldiers going in and murdering and massacring what came to be 120 people, including children. Midnight, February 25th, 1643, quote, "Infants were torn from their mothers' breasts," de Vries recorded, "and hacked to pieces in the presence of their parents, and the pieces thrown into the fire and in the water. Other sucklings being bound to small boards were cut, stuck, and pierced, and miserably massacred in a manner to move a heart of stone. Killed 120 native people at Pavonia and Corlaer's Hook on both sides of Manhattan." That's who William Kieft was, Director General of New Netherland. Indians reacted by forming an alliance of all of the nations along the Hudson River to begin initiating attacks to burn out Dutch settlements, shut down forts, and attack the people lying along the borders of New Netherland. And here the cynicism of Willem Kieft affected people of New England background because he settled them in a cordon sanitaire, or a boundary of English settlements that surrounded the core of the Dutch colony. One of those who paid the price for Willem Kief's genocidal attack in August 1643 was Anne Hutchinson, who, along with every member of her family except for a little girl of hers who hid in a cleft in the rock, they were all massacred by Wampiage, a Munsee Indian chieftain who had sent warning to all the families to leave. Anne Hutchinson had placed her faith in the Lord's protection, and that did her no good when the Indians retaliated for the war that Willem Kieft had begun. This plunged New Netherland into a terrible crisis and into a war that threatened the existence of everyone there, Dutch and English alike. And so it came that the people of New Nederland, and specifically those in New Amsterdam, rallied to the point of rebellion against Willem Kieft, and they elected their own 8-man council to restrain and restrict Willem Kieft and to keep him from engaging in further acts of tyranny like raising taxes and starting any more wars with additional Indian tribes along New Netherlands borders. This depiction of the Dutch masters of members of a syndicate is probably a good reflection of the Board of 8 Men, the Acht Man van Manhattan, or 8 Men of Manhattan Council, of which Isaac was elected by the ordinary people in New Amsterdam, that is New York, in September of 1643. And here we actually have the Dutch colonial minutes that reflect the election that occurred there over Willem Kieft's objection, as popular democracy thrust Isaac Allerton in the forefront of a freedom movement. You'll see his signature up there, his name up at the top right-hand corner, and you see it there at the bottom left-hand corner, Isaac Allerton. He was one of 8 men of English and principally Dutch extraction, elected to represent and protect the people of this colony from a tyrannical director general. Why did citizens of New Netherland elect Isaac, this outsider? Because he was an insider too. He'd been living there in the colony since 1638. He had risen to prominence as a fair-minded man who served as a mediator and an arbitrator under Director General Willem Kieft, and would serve in the same capacity along with Plymouth colony merchant Thomas Willett, who served Plymouth colony on the main frontier as a fur trading agent in the 1640s. In 1642 under Willem Kieft, in 1654 under Peter Stuyvesant, known famously for his peg leg after he lost his leg to a Portuguese or Spanish cannon charging into an enemy fortress in the Caribbean, and then for the rest of his life stomped around New Netherland, famously grimacing and growling at people because of the phantom pain from the severed leg, but still got around and was a far more competent and courageous leader than the genocidal Willem Kieft ever was. In January 1644, while this controversy is going on in New Netherland at New Amsterdam, Isaac is in the southern part of New Netherland along the contested borderland of the Delaware River, known to the Dutch as the Soet River, and known as the Lenape-Wittung, or River of the Lenape, to the Lenape tribesmen who sold their furs and corn and other things to both the Dutch of New Netherland and to the Swedes settled along in Delaware and early Philadelphia, with Cocaco and Salem. And this answers a question that Brenton Simons posed when there was an NEHGS meeting at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia at the end of July. Will someone connect the history of Boston with Philadelphia, where where the host meeting occurred? Well, Isaac Allerton did that, in the 1640s and the 1650s. With Cocaco, or Philadelphia, started out as a city during this period of time where the Swedish governor Johann Prince held his Princehof, the largest state house between Williamsburg, Virginia, and Boston. It was his fur trading center in Nova Suecia, or Nya Sverige. It was the new Sweden colony in the contested borderland between the Swedes and the Dutch of the 1640s. Isaac served as a witness in America's first international appeal and tribunal that occurred in that contested Delaware River Valley. And here are his colleagues on that first international tribunal aimed at bringing peace by having an adjudication that could be considered fair by both the English and by the Swedes and by the Dutch. So Governor Johann Prince, he was the Swedish governor who presided over it and acted as judge, but we have the Finns, Swedes, Dutch, and English all working together to ensure that the force of law was more powerful than the law of force in the contested borderlands of the Delaware River Valley in the 1640s. This is a depiction of a Swedish governor general that's found that I photographed at the Army Museum in Stockholm. And this is a pretty good representation of what Johann Prince looked like as governor general of the New Sweden colony based out of what is now Wilmington, Delaware, which was then known as Fort Christina, and out of Tinicum Island, Philadelphia, then known as the Princehof or Prince's Court. Basically, three questions Johann Prince asked this appellate panel, of which Isaac Allerton was a witness and a member. Based on the evidence presented to them, had Prince been unjust to the English? And all answered no. Had he driven the English from their homes? And this is accurate. He did not. He would rather have kept the English settlers along Salem and the Salem River in western New Jersey, which was part of New Sweden colony, because they grew tobacco and corn and were providing essential supplies for the colony. He had not driven them out, and so it was accurate for the panel to answer he had not driven the English from their homes. Had he forced allegiance to Sweden amongst these English people, including settlers from New Haven? Again, the answer was no. Governor Prince reported the results to Bay Colony Governor Winthrop in a post-hearing ruling report. Isaac witnessed and signed, helping keep the peace among New Sweden, New England, and New Netherland, a task of international diplomacy that Isaac engaged in again and again during the next decade. Here are pipes that I photographed at the State Museum of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg as part of a team of New Netherland, New Sweden archaeological researchers based out of Delaware, including my friend Craig Lucchese. We got these pipe fragments that have been excavated by Marshall Becker in the Princehof excavations. You see there at the top, these the top left is a funnel angled pipe that the Dutch had begun making while copying native designs from the Oneida. And you see another funnel angle pipe, the one down at the bottom left-hand corner. There's the original stone pipe, soapstone pipe at the right-hand side, and that one marked 2D3 at the far left-hand side, that's an English pipe, and there's also an English pipe down at the bottom. So what you see here is a piece partly preserved and essentially a fossil record of negotiations between Englishmen, Dutchmen, Swedes, and natives right at Philadelphia. Brent and Simon, there's your connection between Boston and Philadelphia in the 1640s. Back in New Amsterdam, things had gotten worse during the war. Willem Kieft had been nearly assassinated by one of his own guards. He had clamped down with martial law on the people of New Netherland. He was resisting any restrictions on his power by the Board of 8 Men. He was beginning to impose taxes on, amongst other things, beer, which was utterly unacceptable, an act of tyranny. And so Isaac Allerton and his colleagues on the Board of 8 Men wrote a petition known as a remonstrance, a remonstrati in Dutch, uh, imploring the assistance of the West India Company and the Estates General of the Netherlands to step in and remove Willem Kieft and replace him with a new governor, while also granting settler rights of self-government, including the elections of stipends or council members and a new governor general. And these were the pleas set forth in this letter, excerpts of which appear here. The 8 men to the Amsterdam chapter of the West India Company, to the honorable, wise, prudent general directors of the Incorporated West India Company, Chamber at Amsterdam. Honorable sirs, we greatly received your letters by the Macht van Enkhuizen, your honor's disposition to extend assistance to this in our truly most unfortunate flight. We must also pray and trust to God that it be done at the earliest opportunity. We afterwards again respectfully dispatched for the ship Blue Cock our general necessity to the High 19, Honorable 19. Blue Cock was the ship of Isaac Allerton's business partner who took these complaints over to Amsterdam at considerable risk to himself. We hope your honors will be favorably regarded the contents thereof, in which we, in a superficial manner, briefly yet truly submitted the first origin whence this war arose to our universal ruin. Would to God it had not been meddled with. They are making complaints against their governor general that would be considered to be sedition or treason by Willem Kieft, who later sought to have Isaac Allerton and Cornelius Mellon and others criminally prosecuted and subjected to the death penalty. The remonstrance was the first request for self-government settlers of any Dutch colony sent to the West India Company or to the Netherlands Estates General, and they put it in a file marked IAGWC, significant, as we will discuss. Honored lords, this is what we have in the sorrow of our hearts to complain of, that one man who has been sent out, sworn and instructed by his lords and masters to whom he is responsible, should dispose of here of our lives and properties at his will and pleasure in a manner so arbitrary that a king dare not legally do the like. We shall terminate here and commit the matter wholly to our God, who we pray and heartily trust will move your hearts and bless your deliberations, so that one of these two things may happen: that a governor may be speedily sent, that is, a replacement of Willem Kieft, with a beloved peace to us, or that your honors will be pleased to permit us to return with wives and children to our dear fatherland, the Netherlands. For it is impossible ever to settle this country until a different system be introduced here, and a new governor sent out with more people who will settle in suitable places, one near the other, in the form of villages or hamlets, and who will be and elect from amongst themselves, the people will elect, a bailiff or scout and schepens, council members, who will be empowered to send their deputies and give their votes on public affairs with the director and council, so that the entire country may not be hereafter at the whim of one man, again reduced to similar danger. So long as this is not done, we say, the rural districts can never be cultivated. Done at Manhattan, on 20th October 1644. Isaac Allerton was a part of the 8 men of Manhattan. How important was he? Let's see. He was the second signer. At this time, he had more experience in litigation, along with, 12 years of service as an assistant governor of Plymouth Colony than any of the rest of these people. He knew self-government. He was one of the signers of the Mayflower Compact. He played a vital role in bringing self-government to New Netherland, and New York's municipal government begins when these demands for municipal reforms and election of state representatives occurs in 1651. So we see here Isaac Allerton, and we see more. Board of 8 men sent this remonstrance on Hovert Lukerman's ship. Lukerman's was Allerton's business partner. It's that first request for self-government. And as we'll see next, we're actually looking at the West India Company original records at the National Archives in Den Haag that Pilgrim scholar Jeremy Banks and I requested and photographed in Den Haag, The Hague, in June of 2022. And if you look at the signatures down there at the bottom, there's Isaac's signature on it, right behind Joachim Carter. And so, he was in the thick of a rebellion against a dictatorial leader, Director General Willem Kieft. Kieft found out about it and tried to have Isaac prosecuted along with Cornelius Mellon, Joachim Keider on the board of 8 men for seditious libel, something that carried the death penalty. Kieft alleged that Jacob Stoffelse and Isaac Allerton principally implored the people to sign the remonstrance to the Estates General. So, according to the man who was rebelled against, Willem Kieft, Isaac Allerton was going around circulating petitions for self-government in New Amsterdam, 1643 and 44. Stuyvesant charged Isaac's colleagues, but never charged Isaac Allerton. Why? Probably because Isaac Allerton proved to be too useful to him and connected with the English, somebody who could make things, happen, somebody who could communicate freely with governors in New England and in Virginia and Maryland. And so while others were prosecuted for seditious libel, Isaac Allerton was rewarded by Stuyvesant with service as a mediator, an arbitrator, and a witness to other proceedings along the Delaware River. Isaac was too valuable to be tossed aside. And here we have, the signatures, and there's some of these men, had to make marks. They had not read laws. They had not been in courtrooms. They had not served as a magistrate. The man who was most qualified to draft this petition, to actually make a plea for relief in the form of a remonstrance, which is also a form of English petition, was Isaac Allerton. He got things done, not just in New England, not just in Virginia or New Haven. He got things done in New Netherland and in New Sweden, an international power broker and arbitrator. And so here we actually see what the South River or the Delaware looked like, divided between New Sweden, New Netherland, the West India Company, and New Haven, because the New Haveners kept trying to forcibly create a colony along the Delaware River. And that necessitated Isaac coming in there and holding a peace conference to resolve the contending disputes along a contested borderland. 1654, New Haven, believing New Sweden was a private venture, and this is Theophilus Eaton and Governor Davenport, they planned to send New Haven settlers in there to forcibly enforce their rights, and Vice Governor Stephen Goodyear of New Haven meets with Treasurer Hendrik van Elswyk of New Sweden for peace talks in Isaac Allerton's warehouse and home on the East River of New Netherland in New Amsterdam. Time and place, April 28th to 30th, 1654. Result, Isaac stepped in response to the New Haven questions, suggesting that this was not a crown colony, but a private colony by a group of pirates and squatters. Isaac said, no, I've actually seen the Swedish crown commissions in New Sweden. These people are legitimate. This reflects the power of Sweden. And if you bundle us into a war, you potentially escalate to a situation where England is at war with its Protestant allies, Sweden and the Netherlands. Please, avoid a war. So blessings to the peacemaker. The result of this New Haven summit, New Haven, New Sweden summit in Isaac Allerton's warehouse was that the New Haveners backed down and ceased to plan to make an armed invasion of the Delaware River in 1654, bringing peace, and avoiding a war at that point. So here we have Isaac Allerton's world in New Amsterdam. We actually have records of him paying 60 florins, the new Amsterdam burger tax, to help build a plank wall, a wall familiar to us today as Wall Street. He was in the thick of American financial history. That's why he was called and many times the first New England Yankee trader. Here we see Isaac Allerton's warehouse on the East River over there by the Fulton Fish Market. If you go there at the old South Street Seaport Museums, and you see there's a berm around it, and it was a two-story place, Allerton's building, as it appeared on the Duke's map in 1664 when the Duke of York landed, invaded, and changed New Amsterdam's name to New York City. Here we actually have a drawing in 1679 that shows the old ferry, which operated right next to Isaac Allerton's warehouse at what's now called Peck Slip, where there was a school and a post office here up through this year. Isaac's warehouse, this two-story, actually three-story building, and the East River as depicted in 1679. But guess what? It didn't go away. It just went underground. For $180 million, Howard Hughes Corporation of Texas purchased the parking lot that sits atop the Isaac Allerton warehouse and building in 2021, and they began excavations, only to be promptly sued by people who didn't want a new building there in place of this parking lot. Here's the unusual shape of this building, just a few blocks from the East River, Beekman Street, Water Street, Peck Slip, and Pearl Street. There's always a street named Pearl Street that's like one street back from the shorelines, whether you're in New England, or whether you were in New Netherlands. And site construction began there in 2022. The lawsuit occurred, and they convinced a New York City judge to side with the people who wanted to protect their view of things and didn't want a big new building coming up, as we'll see. So that stopped the excavation that might have yielded incredible artifacts in Isaac Allerton's warehouse, such as these from his business partner, Augustine Herman, whose warehouse was excavated nearby in downtown Manhattan. Here we see Dutch marbles, Dutch coins, smoking pipes, crockery from Delft with the blue-white. These are the sort of things that could be, underground beneath the parking lot, like the king in the parking lot, Richard III over in England. Here we may see, Isaac Allerton's warehouse under the parking lot. And here we have Lisa Pennington, my wife, raising arms to say this is the corner of the parking lot under which Isaac Allerton's warehouse stood. And we know that that is accurate. Here was an old plaque that's dated from 1647 to 1659. This ground was occupied by the warehouse and residence of Isaac Allerton, a passenger on the ship Mayflower, assistant governor of Plymouth Colony, and 20 years a leading merchant of New Amsterdam, the first Yankee trader. An excavation began in 2022, but got stopped by this lawsuit. And Seaport residents cheered after a judge halts construction, but they aren't cheering today because on October 22nd, 2022, they stopped that excavation. But in 2023, the New York Court of Appeals reversed that ruling and opened it up. And the Howard Hughes Corporation is excavating carefully because there were 5 thermometer factories at that site who polluted the whole area with mercury. But the archaeologists who are excavating it are taking special steps for their own safety and protection because they see it important to make New Netherlands history live again by excavating the artifacts of people like Isaac Allerton who played prominent roles in that colony. Now, having gone through all of that, let's come here and ask ourselves for a moment, were the Plymouth Pilgrims simple rustics? Derek Ruttman, in his book Husbandmen of Plymouth, Farms and Villages in the Old Colony, he said Plymouth Colony was a backwater. It's people quiet, basically conservative, so rising above the ordinary round of daily work. What bores, or Richard Middleton in Colonial America History. Simple folk who had few ambitions other than to survive and worship in their own fashion, comprised Plymouth's small, uninfluential colony. Why should we even bother studying the history of such insignificant people? Well, there's good reason. because those characterizations got it wrong. And the truth is, Plymouth colony produced sophisticated, intelligent diplomats, governors, and merchants who transformed the shape of early America. Isaac Allerton, he rebelled against arbitrary authority, and he strove for democratic self-government, whether the arbitrary authority was that of King James I in England or Willem Kieft in New Netherland. Plymouth was never a rustic backwater. In addition to Isaac, the father of New England commerce, other sophisticated businessmen began in Plymouth colony too, including Miles Standish, Edward Winslow, William Bassel, who convinced the Court of Assistants of Plymouth colony in 1643 to grant complete religious freedom, something pocket vetoed by William Bradford, but nevertheless, it reflects that there were a majority of the Court of Assistants who were urging complete religious toleration of all faiths as early as 1643. And commerce fostered toleration. Isaac transacted business with pagan Indians, French, Portuguese Catholics, Anglicans, Puritans, Anabaptists, Lutherans, and a Muslim, Anthony the Turkish Saleh. He transcended boundaries and prejudices, and through his father-in-law, William Brewster, trained his own son, Isaac Allerton Jr., sufficiently well and gave him sufficient fluency in Latin and Greek that he was admitted to Harvard College in 1647, and in 1650 graduated from Harvard College, the one and only descendant, child of the Mayflower Pilgrims to graduate from Harvard, and he subsequently became the second most powerful man in colonial Virginia. So Plymouth was no place for rustics and rubes. It was at the heart of Atlantic commerce. Isaac died in his beloved New Haven in 1659 at age 73, 2 years after William Bradford died in Plymouth. His descendants included another famous New Yorker, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was in the blood. At this point, I want to thank all of you for listening patiently to this presentation. I stand ready to answer questions.
Wow, David, thank you so much for that interesting and enlightening presentation. We will get to your questions in just a moment. Before we do, I want to just briefly mention a few upcoming programs. So it's not too late to register for our online course, Beyond the Grave, Uncovering Life Stories from Death Records, led by David Allen Lambert and Melanie McComb. Then on October 19th, researcher Kim Manisto will lead a session on published resources for New Jersey research. And if you'd like to look more closely into your own Mayflower lineage and heritage and to verify your connection to the Pilgrims, join us for a 3-part online course starting on November 1st. And registration is now open. Just go to americanancestors.org/events. All right, so let's get to several questions that have been asked. One is, and I think this is a common question, David, that you've probably heard, and something that you touched upon early on in the presentation. But can you talk a little bit more about your where did you get your information about Isaac's parents? It seems like there are several different theories, kind of, on who his parents are.
Certainly. In fact, I've researched that question in great depth. I salute the pioneering work of Caleb Johnson, Sue Allen, and Simon Neal for delving into the East Anglian Archdiocese of Suffolk records and the manorial records of East Berkholt. And I've confirmed, their research by going to the Suffolk Record Office in Ipswich and photographing every page of the 2 manorial records, also going to the National Records Office in Kew, England, over in Richmond to research there, and then to research in the records of East Berkholt. And that confirmed that it personally confirmed that Caleb Johnson, Sue Allen, and Simon Neal were absolutely correct. There's every indication there that Isaac Allerton and his sister Sarah, who came to Plymouth on the fortune of 1623, they were born in East Berkholt. That was further confirmed by Jeremy Bangs from the municipal records of Leiden, who produced a will of Elizabeth Barker Winslow, in which she left money to her friend Isaac Allerton at a time when she was married with Edward Winslow, which has befuddled Caleb Johnson and everybody else who's looked at it. But that's in a document that also involved John Carver, also, who was born grew up in Suffolk. So what all of this reflects is there was a powerful group of early pilgrims based in East Anglia that included Dr. Fuller and the master of the Mayflower and various, a lot of people came from East Anglia. And so this supplements our understanding of the Pilgrims as not just being based out of Scrooby, not just being William Bradford and William Brewster or Edward Winslow from the north of England, but a lot of prominent people, including the first governor, John Carver, and Isaac Allerton, and Elizabeth Barker, who married Winslow, and Dr. Fuller, all coming out of East Anglia. Now, the common thing that I keep hearing from people who rely on Find a Grave or Wikipedia is they say, well, I thought Isaac was the son of Edward Winslow of London, because that's what I find on those two esteemed sources. And didn't Edward Allerton of St. Dionis Backchurch marry Rose Davis of London? Weren't they the parents of Isaac Allerton? There's absolutely no evidence to show it. Walter S. Allerton, who wrote the history of the Allerton family, couldn't find records where Isaac was born, so he let speculation serve as evidence. He found Edward Allerton, who was serving as a schoolmaster, one licensed by the Anglican Church in England, in London, approximately 1586. And just because of the name, assumed that Isaac could have been born to this fellow in London, and misread the records in Leiden that described Isaac Allerton as being a younger man from London, a young man of London. All those records proved was that Isaac Allerton had served as an apprentice in the worshipful order of blacksmiths in London, which we know he did from other records from the Ipswich area. So, there is no basis for asserting that Isaac Allerton was born to Edward Allerton and Rose Davis in London. None. He was born in East Berkholt in Suffolk.
Thank you. We also have a few questions asking about kind of his family and, especially maybe his relationship with his wife. Did his wife and children travel with him to New York, or were they staying in Plymouth?
Isaac Allerton's first wife, Mary, who came from Newbury, and people haven't found that, but it could well be in East Anglia too, which is different than the perceptions of a decade ago. She came with them along with, and she was pregnant at the time she came to New Plymouth with Isaac and their son Bartholomew, their daughter Mary, their daughter Remember, aboard the Mayflower in 1620. She gave birth to a stillborn child, probably because of the horrendous conditions of the Mayflower voyage. She gave birth to a stillborn child at Provincetown in November of 1620. She was suffering from sickness and being treated by Giles Heald, the surgeon or chirurgeon of the Mayflower, as reflected in a copy of Isaac Allerton's own book of Psalms that has ended up in the Virginia Library, where he said that he was writing from Virginia, Verginea, meaning New Plymouth, in February of 1620, and he gave the book to Giles Heald, probably because Giles Heald was treating Mary Allerton. And, ironically, Giles Heald, the ship's chirurgeon, may have killed her because the standard treatments for scurvy and exposure at that time were bloodletting, through leeches or lancet, and purgings. And so a woman who was fragile after delivering a stillborn child on the edge of the Atlantic on the frontier ends up being bled and purged by a ship surgeon who was doing the very best he could to help her, but may have killed her. That was the first wife. Second wife was William Brewster's daughter, Fear Brewster, who gave birth to Isaac Allerton's youngest son, Isaac Allerton Jr., the Harvard graduate. And she died during the Great Plague of 1634 and 16 in Plymouth. Just, the second wife who had died, to Isaac. He married the third, Joanna Swinnerton, of what appears to be northern New England, or she may have been originally of Swedish extraction, but she was his wife in the New Haven days. And I would like to say that 3 years after Isaac died in 1659, when King Charles II was sending his assassins to hunt down those men who had risen up against his tyrannous father, Charles I, and had signed his death warrant, including Whalley and Gough, two of the regicides who signed the death instrument for, the death sentence for Charles I. When he sent his assassins to track down and kill those men, they took refuge in New Haven. And the records reflect that Isaac Allerton's wife, Joanna Swinnerton Allerton, hid them behind the wainscoting in her kitchen in the house of four porches that Isaac Allerton built in downtown New Haven in the center of the city. She hid them at risk to her own life, and after convincing the assassins that they would not find Whalley and Gough there, they left behind, and then Whalley and Gough went up to live in the caves outside of New Haven and to settle in other parts of the country. And then during King Philip's War, when the settlement was under attack, Whalley emerged to rally the defendants, to rally the people of that city, using his military experience gained under Cromwell's command in the English Civil War. So it's interesting to note that Isaac Allerton's that his widow, his last wife, was not only a shoe merchant who went down as far as Virginia to collect old debts of people owed to Isaac Allerton, but that she risked her own life to save Calvinist exiles who would have faced assassination by Charles II's assassins.
A few more questions because we're well over time, but these are all great questions. One person asks about where could we find historic markers on Isaac Allerton? They say that they know of a small plaque at the cemetery near Yale, but are there other places where you'll see kind of historic markers or plaques about Isaac Allerton?
Search for him in the court records, contractual records, and other places of New Netherland, New Sweden, New England, New France. In other words, your sweep would begin in Leiden in Holland, continue throughout East Anglia and London, would come down the coast beginning in Newfoundland, and would end in Curacao and Barbados, particularly in Virginia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Philadelphia, and Delaware court records, and the records of Swedish journals of the Swedish Governor Johan Rising, who included detailed transcripts of his commercial negotiations to buy a load of tobacco that Isaac Allerton had brought up from Virginia, and then to ship it back to Sweden in 1655. I mean, these are remarkable documents that bring to life early colonial America, involving one man who shaped and reshaped early Atlantic history, and was essentially, a kind of a Forrest Gump of the 17th century, in that he was present at an incredible series of historic events that created 17th century America.
So really, there should be historic plaques kind of just strewn about all of the Northeast and beyond, really, to kind of note where he lived, or how he engaged with those moments in history.
There should be.
Yeah. Let's end with several questions about the book that you're working on. Can you talk a little bit about um, kind of your where you are in the process? Is there a publication date assumed or that you're working toward?
Lisa and I are still writing it. It reflects 20 years of research, putting together electronic databases that have every contract, covenant, church record, military record, and other record that touch upon Isaac Allerton's life or quote him or examine the history of his sister Sarah, his parents, Bartholomew and Mary, the complete short records of Rafe Allerton, because we believe that he's either a grandfather or, granduncle, and all of Isaac's children, one of whom, Mary Allerton, was the last of the Mayflower pilgrims to die in 1697. So we put together this, and we have traveled to almost every place we know that he lived, transacted business, or conducted government. It's a comprehensive record and fills about 20,000 pages. And so the process of condensing that and bringing it to life is something that we're working on, daily while doing other things in our life. And Lisa, is spending some time as Governor General of the Mayflower Society, getting out ready to tell the message, but she works with me on telling Isaac's story and the story of the Allerton family. And we hope to share that with everyone once it's finished, maybe a year from now.
Well, I know that we're all looking forward to that. So thank you so much for all of your work on that project, for your time this afternoon and this really fantastic and truly enlightening presentation. As you mentioned at the top of the hour, there are so many, I think, misconceptions about Isaac Allerton and um, some old school gossip that has just been around for far too long. So we need to right those wrongs.
Well, we hope to present people with the other side of the story and to show that much that has been written about Isaac reflects either bias or political interest or repetition of sources hostile to him. We're not professing to be sole holders of the truth, but what we believe is that when Isaac's story is fully told, it will, bring fresh perspectives to the birth of democratic self-government in Plymouth Colony and in New Amsterdam.
Great. Well, thank you again, David. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. And of course, we did go well over our allotted time. But as you leave the event this afternoon, you will have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback on today's webinar. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any feedback is very helpful and appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American ancestors to help keep these programs free and to create others. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, visit us at americanancestors.org. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Thank you and goodbye for now.